what benefit does it make for producers to be seen in festivals? It's not like a director, you know?
I agree. That's why I said I think it's a bigger payoff potentially for a filmmaker, for a director, as opposed to a producer. But you know, if you what it does is if you, because of that, if you're the one that produced several of those, people are going to say, hey, that guy really has an eye for material. He knows how to find directors. You know, he knows how to spot talent. Maybe you pull together. I mean, people are amazed all the time at what people do at certain amounts of money. It's like, how in the world, you know, did you do that? That's quite, you know. And if that gets expressed in a short film, that may have a value that you might not look at it and say, well, you know, where's the payoff in that, right? It might not be there, but you know, you might be surprised.
When you're asking for budget, this is a problem I have. Should I ask for more, or maybe this is too much? You know what I'm saying? It's like, let's say I say, you know, if I want to get this and this and this person, so it's going to be 5 million, but I can really do it for 200,000, no problem, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's one question, and second is, someone told me after the movie is made, not to tell them the budget, just say it's like 3 times more, because they will try to cut you off anyway.
Well, sales agents do that all the time. You know, I mean, it's gotten harder to do because there have been some really bad examples where, you know, that ended up in litigation and you know, really bad things have happened to people by misleading people about the budget. But in general, I kind of agree with that point. It's like, what matters is what somebody's willing to pay for it, more so than what it costs. It's more of a curiosity thing about what did it cost, right? Because at the end, especially when you have the finished product, it's like, okay, it's either got a value in the marketplace or it doesn't.
Right.
In a way, it shouldn't matter.
So, my first question was how to know how much money to ask, because basically the same film can be made for a certain amount of money, but different, obviously the production value is going to be different and so on.
And that conversation happens at every level. Same with studio movies. You know, big time filmmakers say, well, you know, if this is going to be a studio movie, it's this is what it's going to end up at. If it's outside the studio system, it's going to be a lower number, made differently. Step one, I'd say, is figure out what your below the line is, and your below the line may change as well. Certain things in your below the line certainly will change, but just the way you're looking at the movie may change below the line. So you might have a range within that, but that helps you address the question of choices in cast. And this happens, by the way, at the studio level too. A lot of times the studio will agree to pay a big time producer goes in, makes a deal for a movie, and they have unfilled cast situations. And sometimes the studio will say, I'll pay over a certain point, I'll pay all the cast breakage. And they're gonna take their own view then, if I had this person as opposed to this person, it's gonna cost that much more, but it's worth it to them to do it. So that kind of, you know, back and forth and cost benefit is done all the time at every level. So I'd say, first of all, draw your line of what your real below the line costs are. That'll help isolate what the variable is in the talent and above the line, right? You'll look at what kind of deals can be made above the line, if you can get them interested in the material. That's shocking sometimes, where you see all these big actors that do something for scale even at their level, you know, that it happens. And that's an example where your budget's gonna be much lower because you got that deal. But from a sales standpoint, to your second question, that's got a value that's not going to have any relevance to the budget, because you know, you got that person. So there's a greater value point. Who cares what it costs? You either like the movie or you don't like the movie. It's harder on the pre-sale though. You know, if you were trying to pre-sell that movie.
No, the pre-sale. I'm talking about the pre-sale, because afterwards, yeah, you have a movie,
Okay.
especially you have a finished product. Would you care how much I spend on it? This is the only one in the world that I have. It's a special product. How much you want to pay for it?
Yeah, you have a couple of issues. One is what the sales agent's how the sales agent's going to market them, going to position the movie for distributors. And the second thing is smart distributors contractually ask to see the bonded budget.
I'm gonna start doing that.
Yeah, and big movie, especially a big movie.
I have a question about, I don't know if people are aware of this, P&A,
Yeah,
printed advertisement. It's a huge part of filmmaking and.
it's huge, it's probably not, if you're making really small budgets and early in your path, it's probably not as big a priority. When you get the bigger stuff, it's a huge priority.
Yeah, because when you do a deal with the studio, obviously you have a bigger picture, then you don't have to worry about P&A. But as independent producers, we'll always have to kind of like, that's a big worry. So we do.
I'm looking at something right now that if it were a studio movie, it would probably be $150 to $200 million budget. As an indie, it's gonna get made for a lot less than that, but it's gonna need a studio in at the beginning. And even at that level, there's a discussion to be had about P&A. Because if you can bring some, you probably don't wanna put all of the P&A and just let the studio spend it. There's an argument that they have an interest in spending it the right way, but they have, as everyone may be aware, the studios are infamous for having this sort of studio accounting, which means that they have a lot of internal profit margins built at every step of the way. So that's why things cost more usually when they go through the studio. And that's why you see movies like, I think someone told me a story about Shrek or something that, isn't showing a profit. How's that possible, right? It's possible because, of this accounting treatment, and it happens. So, if the studio's getting involved though, and you start that conversation by saying, you know what, I'll co-finance the P&A with you. If you have those resources, I would want to find out what that means, because that may change the terms economically, and the studio views that differently, because even they prefer to be, other than, as everyone knows, they're making a lot of these big tentpole movies, right? And they're not making as many independents directly. But regardless, they want to be in the business of being the distributor and collecting distribution fees. It's a big value point then, are they funding and risking their own P&A money? If you can change that discussion with them, that may mean a lot. It may mean the difference between them wanting a movie or not wanting a movie, because at a certain investment amount, it may make sense to them and another it might not.
So for independent filmmakers, for a lower budget, where do they find money for P&A? How do you?
I think it would be a happy problem to have, to be quite honest, because what that means is that you've got a domestic distributor interested. So if you're gonna, especially for theatrical, I mean, you can argue that there's P&A to be raised in a lot of different ways. One example, depending on what kind of subject and the nature of the movie, I always think that you ought to explore what's possible in the world of brands, and because they put up money sometimes if your project aligns with their demographic. So it could be a consumer brand, and it's not like product placement. It's not like someone's gonna pick up Diet Coke. It could be something much more subtle than that. But if the movie hits the target demographic that they want to get to with their brand, you see them sometimes put up money, and sometimes it's not even recoupable money. It's just, it's kind of it's kind of a promotional money for them. So, but.
Is it wise to kind of build at least a portion of P&A into your budget when you raise the money?
If what you're telling capital needs to happen to get their money back, then yes. They still might not do it, but because that happens a lot, where people say, well, if all these great things happen, this is what you'll make. But then a lot of times the movie's struggling to find a distributor. They got made without a US distributor, for example. It's not going anywhere. And then you have to have a second conversation about how much P&A it might take. And usually the first investor who came in is like, at what point are they, there's a phrase, am I throwing bad money after good money? Or good money after bad money? Yeah.
Can I just ask about the budget when you're trying to have your budget bonded? Isn't there like
some sort of software systems that can calculate all these estimates with whether they're SAG or not, and that's really how you would have it bonded. Am I correct in thinking
Yeah,
that?
I'm not a line producer, but there
Right.
are a couple of, you know, I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
Is it
Movie Magic.
Movie
Movie
Magic,
Magic,
and they have a
yeah.
budgeting component of Movie Magic, and there's at least one or two others that are kind of known. But yeah, and some of them, you make sure you get the updates all the time, because as those guild
Yeah.
and residual things come up, they get updated.
Right. And does that kind of ultimately bond the budget, or do you have to send it off to like a lawyer then to have it?
Neither one.
Oh, really?
A bond company is a specialized
Oh, okay.
company. And you know, the sad part, at really small budgets, you're gonna find that the cost of the bond is gonna feel so disproportionate. And part of the problem that creates that is there aren't enough bond companies. So, like we were talking about earlier, you know, do you take a risk on a little movie, a bigger, certain size movie? The bond companies, I think for the most part have minimums. So if you take their minimum and compare it to $100,000 budget, it's gonna look, you probably come to the conclusion you'd be crazy to try to bond this. You're gonna bond though if you're, it's probably as you move upstream in amounts of capital and budget. But what they are is they're taking their own view on it. What they do is they have a deal, they have insurance, actual big insurers behind them, like Film Finances, I think, is still with Lloyd's of London. So Lloyd's of London is entrusting this company to make good and smart calculations about risk. So they're like a specialty risk advisor for the insurance industry. But they're gonna have their own view on things. You know, they're gonna say, I've seen movies, you know, producer, and I know they can do it. They say, look, we're gonna wrap principal photography, the movie's gonna be delivered in 3 months. I've had dozens of those conversations where I have to look at them and say, I believe you, the bond company's not gonna believe you. They're gonna make you schedule, their bond is gonna make you, so they won't bond that delivery date. They won't guarantee that delivery date. They're gonna take the end of principal and add 5 months to it, no matter what, you know, and a lot of times that's what happens. And then within that, they look at the specifics of, you know, post, effects, delivery, you know, any specific things to the project that might skew that one way or the other. But, you know, I don't think they're gonna bond a 3-month delivery.
You touched on product placement, so that could be part of the budget, financing the movie?
Absolutely,
Tell us
yeah,
more.
and we didn't really focus on that, but yeah, I think, and especially at smaller budgets, it could be. I mean, you know, it's akin to how a lot of documentary filmmakers approach things, right? They get corporate sponsorship. In this case, you're really making a commercial product. Maybe there's a way to do that. There's, you know, don't forget music. Don't forget music. You might get, you know, the rights. You maybe have relationships or know people that have relationships in the music industry. You'd be surprised, you know, it's small movies that manage to squeeze $50, $100, $200, $300,000 just out of the soundtrack. Remarkable.
Let's sell it separately afterwards?
Yeah.
So how do people approach that, the whole product placement idea?
Start with what's in your story and in your film, you know, and if you, it's tricky because I've had this conversation at studio levels, and the studios, you know, all think that they know how to market the movie, and they don't want the brands in there with their fingerprints on the development process to set the movie up. So they sometimes, unfortunately, think of it as product placement. But you know, I think that's, especially if you look at what's happening in digital platforms and sort of the trends that are out there, I'm certain that brands are going to become more relevant and important at all levels of filmmaking. Just think of it just like any social media thing, right? Social media is another place. There's a couple points, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alejandro. Couple points. One is everyone's talking about feature film. I think it's really a great idea. don't discount the fact, depending on what, if you're starting with a script, or you're starting with just, you know, the intellectual property, it's not yet a script even, don't discount the fact that best end place for that may not be a feature film. You know, it may be TV. TV's gotten very hot right now. So, you know, I like to think, if you really think about intellectual property and think, where's the best value for this? And there are examples where people have sort of cultivated a following on social media for their intellectual property or story idea. You know, they're really clever things that people have done. And when they go to have the capital conversation with the investor, they say, look at how many people are following this right now. Those are you know, those are potentially valuable components, and those are things that, you know, just a lot of effort, but, you know, if you can make that happen, you've created value, and probably at a very, you know, minimal cost point.
Just I'm working on a film that's set in the black community. Are there sort of lines?
I'm sorry, what?
A film that's set within the black community.
Yeah.
And do there tend to be lines drawn between distributors and financiers as to whether it's in a particular genre or
Yeah.
demographic?
Yeah, I mean, people have different views on, you know, where that can be helpful because it's so targeted,
Yeah.
versus where you've just limited your market. And different people really have different views on that. You know, those films often get labeled as urban films. I just had a conversation the other day here in the US about Latino films. Massive demographic. Some crazy statistic, like I want to say 25%, I think someone calculated that 25% of the US box office is being driven by the Latino demographic. And yet, you know, you have seemingly only a few options in TV, but yet you've got a big part of the landscape, you know, is comprised of that. So people are trying to figure those things out all the time. Urban is another one. I did a thing where I talked to people at the California State Hispanic Society, and they did a conference, and part of the conference was we were fielding pitches of specific, you know, projects. And I have a longtime producer friend who happens to be Latino, and he said, I think, one of the wisest things. He said, in terms of the development in the story, he said, you know, why is everybody trying to make a particularly Latino project? And he was more focusing this on, you know, Latino filmmakers and people in the industry. And he was just sort of saying, you know, why don't we just celebrate like the phenomenal films that happen to get made by Latinos? You know, and I think it's an interesting, so that's a different view of it. But there is a market. It's just, you know, you have to be very laser focused on how you extract that value, because you'll have a lot of people cast you aside because it's not mainstream enough for them, and internationally it presents challenges for them.
Is there something to be said for just kind of not drawing attention to that if it's not clear
Sure.
from the script? Because they're not going to be able to sort of back
Well,
out
it
when it
isn't.
comes
It
to
isn't. I
casting.
mean, I'd say yes. However, yeah. I mean, you make a good point. Maybe it's, you know, maybe it has, you know, maybe it has an African American cast, but the story isn't particularly that. I mean, yes. However, just recognize that at some point people are going to have a conversation about a specific cast. And depending on what conversation you're having, if it's a distribution conversation, it could be one thing. If it's a capital conversation, it could be a different thing, where it's just not what they envisioned, and it may change their view of the commerciality of the movie. Not necessarily for any right reason, but internationally it might just be a demographic question. Do they think their audience is going to identify with that cast? I mean, it happens, and that's a real thing, and that may change their view of what it's worth to them.
aspiring filmmaker, which way is the better to start with short film, like this really interesting idea in short film, or somehow to shoot a feature film? Because we had a lot of conversations in our film school, and different people are saying different things, and different guests, they are like, someone saying that feature film, you are showing nowadays that you are able to shoot and to show the whole like feature film, but someone said that it's better to get to the market with short film.
It's how they say, the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? Because I mean, it's really, you are gonna get a variety of opinion, because people, it's just like the whole business, everybody has a different opinion. And it survives, or it either, you know, really succeeds or doesn't succeed as much as people's expectations, based on what the expectations were, right? So, I mean, I think part of the answer might be, you know, just decide for yourself, what's the most important thing to have people know about you early. So you can make the arguments both ways. I'd sort of say, you know, as a foundation, either way, focus on idea, story, and you as a storyteller. You know, if you're gonna be the filmmaker, then how do you know, and it may depend on the story, right? Because there's some stories that you just sort of look at and say, I could never get that across in a short. And other things where you say, so you kind of may self-define, depending on what you're most interested in, what should be a film, a feature film, versus what shouldn't be a feature film. Or it could be TV, or it could be, you know, again, you see people come everywhere from, you know, advertisements, commercials, through to people that move up from first being a cinematographer. You know, it really kind of depends on what you think is gonna be both noticeable, that's gonna benefit you, and where you think that's gonna take you. So I'll give you an example. If you, one comparison, if you direct a feature film, I think it's a valid point to say, well, you know, that shows that probably you manage that process with potentially more people over a longer time, you know, and the counter argument is, well, you have a lot more time to do it. And maybe you had more incredible people around you that helped execute that. So it's a, you know, people are gonna have different views even after you do it as to your role versus other people's role in the process. So you might make an argument that a short film maybe is a little bit of a purer expression as a filmmaker, just because there's inherently gonna be less people involved in shaping what the end product is, right? Because it's a short film. So, you know, so I'm deliberately not giving you an answer, because I don't think there is an answer.
And also, you're saying that a lot of people coming from different areas and fields, and from the producer standpoint, like, for example, I was doing commercials and music videos, commercial stuff for a while, and then I'm trying to transfer to a film industry, right? If the producers are looking for the background, what was done in the past, and they're figuring out that you haven't done any like feature film, and what you've been doing is commercials mostly.
Yeah, I mean,
How
look,
it's like,
yeah, I mean, it's gonna depend on who if you're talking about you as a filmmaker and then being attracted to producers, different producers are gonna have different views of that as well. Some are gonna, and I just gave you an example where, you know, I have an interest in a fund, and kind of one of the parameters of the fund is no first timers. So if you didn't already have a feature film credit, that would be something that you'd have to overcome to be as attractive to that specific capital. Private equity investor may think very differently about that. Some producers are gonna think you're much more cutting edge because of that background. You know, and they might take a business approach and say, okay, if I took this guy and I put the right line producer around him, right? I put in particular a great AD around him and a great cinematographer, I think this guy can pull it off. But they're gonna view it, it is gonna be a step, obviously, just for the format, from whatever you were doing that wasn't a feature, doing a feature. But, you know, I make the argument all the time about, you know, commercial directors, man, they know, for low budget stuff, man, they know how to get in and get out and get their shots and get, you know, it's amazing. The whole commercial world is remarkable because they are really on a fixed, you know, time and money budget. They gotta get in and get their stuff and get out. So the more creative that is, the more impressive that is.